one more contribution from the floor. Yeah.
I'm Richard Straub, European Learning Industry Group. One point that occurred to me, when we talk about technology, we should always keep in mind, and I think it was mentioned several times, that it fulfills a purpose. We want to achieve something. And I think when we talk about education and kids, the fundamental questions are, what ultimately do we want to achieve? What is the challenge of our century? What is the challenge of the future? So I believe we want to have kids who are able to make judgments, who are able to go deep into subject matters and to understand subject matters.
Yes.
We want kids who can make connections between various areas and who can help to address the challenges of the future. And then I think we can ask ourselves, how do we achieve that? And one element certainly can and will be technology, but we should not move this discussion solely to technology.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much for that, and thank you everybody for your questions and comments and contributions. You've been, I have to say, extremely well behaved. We did a debate like this at eLearning Africa, and by this stage in the proceedings, people were dancing on their seats and screaming and shouting. But you've been, and it was great. And you have been quite subdued by comparison. Anyway, thank you for your contributions. I'm now going to ask each side to sum up very briefly, and I think we're going to have to keep it to 5 minutes each. So if you'd like to go first, Donald.
Okay. I'll be even briefer than 5 minutes, if time is short. I mean, Alan Kay once said that technology is anything that was invented after you were born, which is a phrase I like. Every generation comes along and points the finger at the new technology which has been sprung upon them. It happened in the 15th century when we invented books. There was a huge movement, deeply, deeply concerned that people would be slaves to the printed word. Similarly with movies and radio and every technology that's come along. But I prefer Douglas Adams, the guy who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe. He had a slightly wider view of this, and I'll read it to you. He's now dead. Great guy. Everything that's already in the world when you're born is just normal. Anything that gets invented after you're 30 is against the natural order of things and the beginning of the end of civilization as we know it. Until it's been around for about 10 years, when it suddenly turns out to be all right, really. Apply this to movies, rock music, TV, word processors, computer games, punk, mobile phones, social networking, and work out how old you are. And it was a wise man, Douglas Adams, because there's a lot of this finger pointing at young people and at parents for not doing the right thing and the underclass, when in fact the technology might just be the salvation for some of those people. As I say, what are children really doing? I take that point about pornography. That is a concern. I have two 16-year-old boys, and every parent is concerned. And there are things one does about that. But it's got to be balanced up. My kids are not watching pornography 7.5 hours a day, every day of the week. Believe me. And believe me. And they may be watching some pornography. I'd say that was normal. You know, didn't you guys have magazines when you were 16 that you looked at? Get real, guys. This is the real world, and kids do real things just as I did when I was their age. The fact is that it's an enabling technology for my kids, educationally, socially. For my sister who has multiple sclerosis, it's been a godsend. I hate to think what would have happened without this technology for her, isolated in her home in a wheelchair. And in the third world, the OLPC project has its faults, but look what's happening in Africa and in those, not third world, but 2.5 world countries like China and so on, with regard to the real use of mobile technology to enhance people's life, economically helping them get small debts, start businesses, raise themselves out of poverty. The danger here is just the pointing to a few cherry-picked studies that show that looking at screens is bad. Looking at screens wasn't bad when it was the movies, it was wonderful. But suddenly, you know, it's okay for a kid to read 3 volumes of Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings, but it's not okay for a kid to play World of Warcraft, because we have this nostalgia about the media that were invented before we were born. And Douglas Adams is right here. You know, let's get real, let's grow up, and let's recognize the fact that we have to work to make the technology enhance the lives of young people, rather than blaming them and their parents and scaring people into going back into a regressive mood where we shove people into classrooms. As for the point that was made about people dying for lectures, I'm in and out a lot of universities, and I'll show you the study of 5 major universities in the UK that shows the following, that 50% of students stop attending lectures within 6 weeks of their first year at those universities. Now, I don't know how many of you have a degree, but I'll bet my bottom dollar that most of you didn't attend all the lectures, found them boring, found them a chore. And if the recommendation is to go back to a world where they're not recorded, so we can't view any of the learning again, what is it in the psychology of learning that ever suggested that you just say something once to a learner, they get it, and that's it? Because that's what the lecture is. The psychology of learning says everything about spaced practice, repeated access to content. And there's a guy in the audience here from the University of Trieste. When they implemented the recording of lectures, that's all, the student assessment went up. It doglegged, because those students were going back and watching those lectures for 2 hours on average each student per evening. And the results in theoretical physics, a tough subject, doglegged upwards. The technology enhances this stuff. It doesn't take away from those boring, dull lectures. I mean, putting boring, dull lectures online doesn't make any difference, I'm sure. But it pushes people forward. And this is about moving forward and not looking in the wing mirror and turning around and going back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Donald. Aric.
Is this mic on here?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. That was a very touching talk, but I'm going to go back to the actual motion that you have to vote on. And the motion isn't about whether children can enjoy a computer game occasionally. I loved violent computer games occasionally. Before, I had to put money in the slot, and it would finish in 6 minutes, and it would be at some sort of arcade. Nowadays, it's a question of whether we want our children to play 2 or 3 hours of that kind of thing. I also never claimed that children spend 7.5 hours a day watching pornography. Where on earth did you get that from? So this is a very emotional way of undermining me, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. And I'm going to read very carefully the motion that you really have to consider. This House believes that the increasing use of technology and social software is damaging students' minds and undermining the benefits of traditional methods of learning. So I go back to my main point, isn't whether children should enjoy television or cinemas or DVDs or social networking. I have no objection with all of those things. I use some of those things myself. What I am concerned about is something which really we haven't had before. It's true that every new invention to do with reading and television worries a new generation of parents. The big difference is the amount of time of these new inventions and the amount of time children can use them alone and the amount of information they can get, including faces and movements of messages from people that we don't know who they are or what they're doing.